Commodore fans, are you ready? It's time for another episode of the Vandy247 podcast on the 440 Sports Network. Keep it locked right here for the best Vanderbilt coverage. Whether it's Clark Lee on the gridiron, Mark Byington and Shea Ralph on the hardwood, or Tim Corbin on the diamond, the Vandy247 crew has you covered. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do. Also, like this video and subscribe to the YouTube channel. That's free and easy to do. Follow the crew on Twitter, Apple Podcast, and Spotify for podcast episodes. Lastly, if you're interested in sponsoring the show, email Chris Lee at chrislee70@gmail.com. And now, pull up a chair. It's time for another episode of the Vandy247 podcast.
Welcome to Vandy247 Live on the 440 Sports Network. I'm your host, Billy Derrick, and we are brought to you by the Wash House as we're continuing to talk all things Vanderbilt basketball. Are you dreading laundry days? It's stealing time to do things that you truly enjoy. Let the laundry professionals at the Wash House take care of that for you. They've got 2 great locations in Nashville. Just drop off your laundry. Their professional attendants can give you back the one thing you can never have enough of, your time. Within 24 hours, you can pick up your nicely folded, fresh, and clean laundry ready to be put away. Log on to washhouseclean.com or stop in today and get your time back. Big show today. We're talking Vanderbilt hoops, obviously the win over Kentucky. We talked all about it on Saturday, and they got an off week this week, and then they'll travel to Norman, Oklahoma on Saturday, so we'll continue to talk about that matchup as well. But we got a special guest on our guest line, and his name is Isaac Trotter, national college football writer from right here at 247 Sports. Isaac, thanks for taking the time.
What's up, man? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, let's start with the game Saturday. Obviously, I know there were probably a lot of people expecting Vandy to hang in there. I mean, the line, I think, ended up at 2.5 right before tip-off, but Vanderbilt gets it done, and they knock off Kentucky for the second time, knocking off a top 10 team and back-to-back weekends at home. Just what was your reaction to that? Was that something that you thought could have happened? Because it felt like the Tennessee game, like, 1-point win, it's you saw a little Memorial Magic. Maybe Kentucky will be more prepared, but Vanderbilt really jumped on them and then ended up getting the win.
No, it was a big time showing, and I think it's one of those situations where there's a little bit of like proof of concept here, because you beat Tennessee and it's like, all right, we beat a really, really physical team, and then you beat Kentucky and it's like, man, that's a really finesse team. And so you've seen Vanderbilt kind of win games with different styles. Edwards' flurry right from the beginning really got it going from the start. I thought a couple other subplots were huge. I thought they did a really good job on Lamont Butler, not letting him get going. I thought they did a pretty nice job for the most part, just staying under control when Kentucky got on that big run. Like, Kentucky is a team that has a ton of oscillations, right? Like, they're going to make a ton of threes and then they're going to go quiet for a little bit. And I think you just have to do a good job of just staying in there during those flurries. And you saw those runs, and Vanderbilt always has a response. So we can kind of get into the nitty gritty of some of the roster stuff that they did late, like the 3-guard lineup that they ran out late, Tyler Tanner, AJ Hogard, and Edwards on the floor together. That was kind of a fun wrinkle. And you're starting to see like Mark Byington really settle in with this roster, being like, hey, we can play a lot of different ways. We can go small, we can go a little bit bigger. They don't have awesome size, but against Kentucky, finding those 3 guards late was really, really important. And they found a way to just get enough stops down the stretch. So it's impressive, and I think my biggest, takeaway from this whole thing is, man, this roster construction was really, really smart, even with maybe not the most resources in the SEC.
Well, and you think back to when they initially signed Kajani Wright from USC, a guy who's not a superstar or anything, but I mean, you think about what they could have been with him, a 6'11", 7-foot type guy that's really long and would have fit perfectly in the SEC. You're like, man, this team, we would have been talking even better about this team right now. But I want to get into that roster construction you talked about, and I'm glad you mentioned that 3-guard lineup. Is this sustainable, them playing small? And obviously through the last couple of weekends at home, it has been. But you go to Tuscaloosa, a lot of teams are going to lose by nearly 20 to Alabama. So, that's kind of par for the course. I just wonder, like down the stretch here with some big road games coming up, I know Auburn's coming in here soon as well. how sustainable is this for Vanderbilt? And if you think so, to what level, down the stretch here in the SEC?
Rim defense is something that I focus on a ton. I watch a ton of basketball, and I think the rim defense is something that's really helped teams at the top of the league continue to flex their muscles. That's not been a strength for Vanderbilt this year. I looked it up before I came on the show. Teams are shooting like 63% at the rim against Vanderbilt, top 100 teams on a lot of volume. So that's a concern, I think, for me kind of moving forward. Can this be sustainable long-term? I'm not sure. Now, what they've done is they've done a really good job of making up for it with the shot volume, right? Like they're taking way more shots than their opponents almost every night because they're winning the turnover battle. They don't turn it over and they turn you over like crazy. So you can kind of mitigate some of those concerns of the rim defense with a defense that turns it over paired with an offense that doesn't turn it over, and you kind of win the shot volume game with that regard. I think a lot of times, like when you talk about Nate Oates in Alabama, it's like, oh, it's shot diet. Like, oh, we take threes and we take shots at the rim. We're going to win the math. Vanderbilt's winning the math. They're just winning it in a different way by saying, hey, we're going to try to take 6, 7, 8, 9 more shots than you. And I think against Kentucky, if I had it right, I think they took 12 more shots at Kentucky. Like that's
and 10 more threes. Yeah,
correct. That's their way of like kind of winning the math game there. So to cover up some of the rim defense issues. So let's just be honest, like the rim defense like this is not going to be sustainable for an elite defense at this point. I don't think Vanderbilt's going to be an elite defense against SEC teams like this. But if they continue to win the turnover margin like this, if they continue to be, right in there on the glass, like they out-rebounded Tennessee, they did a good job on the boards against Kentucky for the most part, that's their way of kind of covering up some of those things that are having some issues on the back end defensively.
Well, and to me, it feels like they're threading they're threading the needle in these games. Vanderbilt is. And I know they won by 5 there against Kentucky, but like Tennessee was a 1-point win. South Carolina was a 3-point win. They had some close, even some close non-conference games. Obviously Drake ended up getting the best of them, but the margin for error is small with this team. And so I look at that as, okay, if they can, like you said, if they can win the turnover margin, if they can continue to force turnovers and score on the other end. I mean, Kentucky had 17 turnovers. I think Vanderbilt had at least 10 points off those turnovers, something like that. So that's their identity. We talked about that a lot on Saturday, Isaac. Like this team, when they're at their best, they're guarding you full court, and they're even they forced some turnovers before the ball handlers got into half court, and they forced some right outside the 3-point line. To me, that's their identity. I don't know if you agree watching this team, but when they're getting steals and getting out in transition, that's when this team is at their best.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think it's a trend that I was starting to notice the last couple of days. Is just like, against Tennessee, it's like, what are they known for? Like they really want to get Chaz going. I think limiting him to 6 attempts was a huge win. Kentucky, like, what are you really good at? Like, obviously it's the threes, but like their ability to take Lamont Butler away, who's been arguably their best offensive player, is huge. So it's like we're starting to see like this team, like, oh yeah, like turning defense into offense is obviously going to be a super huge part for them moving forward. But their ability to understand the scouting report and be like, all right, we're going to try to take away what you do best every night is really interesting to me. I think that's something that they're going to have to really lean on moving forward because, you just look ahead at the schedule. It's like, all right, it's Oklahoma coming up next week. Like that's a team that's really good in pick and rolls. They got an NBA type of caliber, lottery pick point guard and Jeremiah Fears. Like we have got to take him away and try to make other guys beat us. So far for the recipe against Kentucky and the recipe against Tennessee, they've done a pretty nice job against those number one options. And, part of that is the AJ Hoggard experience, right? Like having him and prioritizing him in the portal, that made a lot of sense, but it's kind of a strength in numbers type of approach here too, with the depth and how they weaponized it as well.
I'm interested coming into the season. I'm glad you mentioned Hoggard. Like when Vanderbilt got him, to me, that was, okay, you've got your point guard. And I know technically everyone's listed as a point guard on this roster, as you know, but it's not just Hoggard. I think another thing that separates this Vanderbilt team from some teams, like it was very clear in the Tennessee game when Ziegler went out, and he sat for the last 7 minutes of that first half, and they tried some Gainey at the point, they tried some Bishop Boswell, I think, as well, but they were off kilter. For Vanderbilt, Hoggard could be off, and you're not the same team with Hoggard on the floor, but Huffman has been okay, he's been fine. Tyler Tanner, the freshman from Brentwood Academy, has also come in and done well. Edwards will bring it up the floor occasionally. So I think that is something with this team, Isaac, too, that if they can just settle it down when Hoggard's off the floor, you're also surviving, right? I mean, I think that was very clear in the Tennessee game, because I heard from some Tennessee people talk about how, man, it'd be nice to have another ball handler, a reliable ball handler right behind Ziegler. Well, Vanderbilt's got a couple of them, and it's not like you're in worry mode every time Hoggard comes out.
And that's, I think, goes back to the roster construction game plan that they did. Like, let's be honest, if you've watched AJ Hoggard for a few years, you're kind of knowing you're signing up for a roller coaster. Like, that's just the AJ Hoggard experience. Like, some days are going to be really, really nasty where he looks awesome. And some days are going to be really, really nasty the other way, where it's like, is he actively hurting our team? And I think Vanderbilt's done a good job of kind of massaging that type of game plan there, where it's like, we don't have to necessarily need him to be on the floor for 38 minutes a night. Like, and I mean, Tyler Tanner, like, what an eval, like what an absolute gem of an eval there. Like what he's been able to do, just he looks super confident, super competent as well. Like I was kind of expecting him to maybe be a little bit overwhelmed by SEC length and athleticism and just the raw size that they can throw at you. But I think an underrated subplot in the SEC is you kind of look through the league, there's small guards everywhere. Like this idea that you need to have like a 6'4", 6'5" point guard just isn't true. There are small guards on every scouting report, and I think that's a situation where Tanner has been able to not necessarily get overwhelmed by some of the perimeter length, but they've done a terrific job. And I think the roster, the building game plan of pairing like that big, strong point guard like Hoggard, who's more of a pass first guy, kind of get it going as like a distributor, with like a scoring, smaller, just instant offense guard like Edwards. That's super smart. Like that was like one of their best decisions of the offseason to see those guys and put them together, because it's fun in the portal to like play like fantasy basketball and like pitch 17 points a game from that place and 17 points a game from this guy, and together they're going to average 34. Like that's just not how that works. The ability to just mesh their strengths and cover up their weaknesses, like Hoggard's terrific defensively. Edwards, like you don't have to necessarily put him on the top opposing guard. Like they really complement each other really, really well. And then when you pair them like with an eval like McLaughlin and an off-ball shooter like Nickel, and then the Collins who can kind of come in and give you a little bit and carry, like it feels like the pieces here start to make a lot of sense. Even though if you're putting pound for pound like this roster, like up to some of the other SEC ones, I wouldn't say like they are more talented than some of the other SEC ones here. But since the pieces fit so well together, and since there's real buy-in under this roster, and Byington's obviously proven he's a culture builder and roster builder, like I think you're kind of getting the most bang for your buck. Whereas, teams like a Texas, who might have way more talent on paper than Vanderbilt, isn't necessarily maximizing the upside of that group.
Well, and we didn't really know. I mean, obviously, in the portal season, and with this being year one of Byington, as the portal gets are coming in, we're like, okay, so these are all solid players, and Edwards, that was obviously a little bit of a shocker, and then Hoggard too. And man, obviously, you paid the money there, but we got to still see how these guys mesh together. I mean, I think the Charleston Classic probably for this team was where a lot of people went, okay, these guys fit. What an evaluation from Mark Byington and his staff, because they didn't really play anybody in the non-conference. But that is a good point there you make on just how well they mesh together. I'm interested in the SEC pecking order where this team stands right now. They're in that top half, which I would not have predicted. They're 4-3. They're in that pack of 4-3 with Tennessee, Mississippi State, A&M, and Ole Miss. Obviously still behind Auburn, Alabama, Florida, and Mizzou. Where does Vanderbilt stand right now in your mind among these SEC gauntlets?
Well, this league is the best in college basketball, and I don't think that's an outlier. So here's how I would tier it. I think if you're looking at tier one national title contenders of like, all right, we think these teams can win it all. Auburn's in that mix. I would put Alabama still in that mix. Florida, for me, is in that mix. And then I think Tennessee would be those four teams where I'm like, I could see those four teams winning 6 in a row. So I think they're in tier one. Tier two is like, all right, which teams do we think could get hot and potentially win the title? I would maybe put Mississippi State in that. I know that might be a little bit of a hot take, but I really like that roster construction. Kentucky, I think I would put in there as well, too, maybe if they can fix the defense. And then there's like this big tier three of like competent, like top 45-ish teams. That's where I feel that Vanderbilt's in there, like with the Missouris, with the Ole Miss, with a team like, Texas, so to speak. We'll see, like kind of shaping up to be in the tournament picture. I think if you look at Bart Torvik right now, like Vanderbilt is like 77% chance of making the NCAA tournament right now, like slated for a 9 seed. That feels right to me, kind of on that same path. They feel to me like a tier 3 team in the SEC. And that is far higher than I think what a lot of people expected from this group. I mean, they were picked dead last in the CBS Sports SEC preseason basketball poll. Like, they have definitely outclassed teams like South Carolina, who has a lottery pick. They've outclassed teams like Arkansas, who was one of the most expensive rosters in college basketball this year. They've outclassed LSU, like even Georgia, who might have a first-round pick. I think you would put Vanderbilt ahead of them right now in that pecking order. Oklahoma, who has a lottery pick, I think you put Vanderbilt ahead of them in that pecking order. It's cool, right? It's kind of cool to see them now in this mix compared to what it was. And I think it does go back to like that theory that if you find the right coach, you could turn things around in a hurry in college basketball. We saw that at Iowa State last year, or 3 years ago, when they won 2 games the entire season, hire TJ Otzelberger and make the tournament. That's kind of what I feel like is happening with Vanderbilt too in year one under Byington.
Well, we've talked about their defense, like you said, top to bottom, like talent wise, they don't have an elite shot blocker. I think they do have an elite perimeter defender in Tanner, and Hogard obviously too is a really good defender. Collins, they're good positional defenders. Like even nickel, I mean, they're clean. The amount of clean strips they get, Isaac, is insane without fouls being called. And I wanted to dig into that deeper as I went back and watched the James Madison, Wisconsin game and some other James Madison games. The way that's how they're coached. Like that, they coach, they swarm on defense. They jumped all over that Wisconsin team last year, and they get after you, but they're also really good on offense. They run great stuff. So it's just emphasizing how much basketball Byington has coached and just how good he is as a coach. We got a question here in the chat room. Is this a top 6 defense in the SEC? And, the last couple of weekends at home, these Saturdays, the way their defense has ignited them, it's easy for Vandy fans to say, man, this is absolutely like one of the best defenses in the SEC. But if you can look at that in many different statistical categories, right? Like Vanderbilt, their points off turnovers is probably top tier in the SEC, but maybe not, actual shots blocked or steals or things like that. So I'm wondering your read on where does this defense stack up in the SEC?
Top 6 feels a little stiff to me. Because I would put teams like Tennessee up there ahead of them, Florida, Auburn. Those 3 teams are a little bit better defensively. I think Mississippi State is too. If you look at SEC play right now, Vanderbilt is 12th in defense. Part of that, though, is just because of the 3-point variance. Teams are shooting 39% from 3 against Vanderbilt in SEC play. If you're looking for optimistic outlook, it's like, okay, that's going to come down a little bit. We're going to have a little bit of shot variance on our side. That might not come down against Oklahoma, though, who is one of the best spot-up shooting teams in the league. Florida could really shoot it as well, too. But maybe you get it at, Texas and Auburn at home. Like, it's like this is going to be a gauntlet. The jury's still out for me on if this defense can be a top half unit, because it just feels like this recipe of forcing turnovers and, they're super well schooled. Like you see, like they have good. Chris Magnon's also a very, very good defender as well. Throw him in that mix. Like they have the pieces on that perimeter. It just. I still don't think they've necessarily played a team yet in SEC play that will throw the ball inside and force Vanderbilt to like defend the rim at an elite rate. And I think you're going to start to see that a little bit like Florida. They won't do that necessarily with Alex Condon, but they are going to abuse them on the offensive glass. And that's been an area of concern for Vanderbilt so far through SEC play. But then when Auburn comes to town, you're going to get a heavy dosage of Nye Broom. You're going to Texas A&M, it's going to be a Pharrell Payne. They're going to give him a ton of touches. Even I think the next time they see Missouri, you're going to still see some booty ball with Mark Mitchell. They're going to try to isolate him inside. So I think I still have some answers to be had on that defensive end right now. And if they can get some 3-point variance on their side, they continue to force turnovers. They continue to be really well schooled on the point of attack. And, they don't give up that many straight line drives. That's one thing I noticed with Kentucky. It wasn't like they were getting in rotation a ton. So they have the pieces to it. I just feel like, when teams are shooting 63% at the rim, that might hold you back from getting into that top 6 defensively in the SEC.
Yeah. Well, there's a type of player that has hurt Vanderbilt this year. I think it started with Mark Mitchell in that Missouri game, just ate Vanderbilt alive. And then Mo Diabate for Alabama just ate Vanderbilt alive as well. And he doesn't, that was probably Diabate's best performance in SEC play against Vanderbilt like that. And then if Andrew Carr would have played, I talked about this with my partner Joey, like he probably would have had a field day, like that type of player. And there's some teams out there in the SEC too, but I've learned that about this Vanderbilt team, like you just talked about, like that 6'9", 6'10", 6'11" guy that can really shoot it, but can also penetrate and just do a lot of everything like that. That's the type of player that's going to hurt Vanderbilt.
Jalen Moore against Oklahoma is going to be a huge test because he's a big time, like that, exactly what you're talking about. Just like super fluid four, could get out in transition, can pass, dribble, shoot a little bit, can post up, pick and pops. Like he does a lot of great work for Oklahoma. He's their most important player. Like the highest upside player on that team is Jeremiah Fears, but Jalen Moore might be their best player right now and their most important player right now. And he's going to be a handful. But I mean, like I love McLaughlin as a defender as well. Like I think he is a complete stud, and so like I'm excited to see McLaughlin go up against a guy like Jalen Moore. That's gonna be a college basketball like sickos one-on-one matchup. If you're dialed in for that one, like you know ball.
Man, I love this team. I mean, it's fun to watch, and obviously it's fun to watch the SEC this year. My last thing for you, Isaac. What can this team do in March? You know, obviously you got the SEC tournament. I mentioned Saturday I might have gotten a little over my skis. I think this team could do some damage in March. Obviously you could say about a lot of teams at the right matchup, but like, you know, if they win that 8-9, I don't think there's too many 1 seeds wanting to play this team. And if Vanderbilt could, 7's probably a long shot, but I mean, you know, if they get hot here down the stretch, maybe they squeeze up there. There's not a 2 seed that would want to play them, I don't think. But even if they get a 10, right, there's not a 7 seed that want to play them. So, you know, we got a lot of ball left to play. But what would you consider this team's like ceiling in March per se, as of right now?
So I think if you're kind of looking at, let's look ahead. Let's say they get an 8-9 seed. If I'm Vanderbilt, I'm going, please God, put me in the Iowa State bracket. Like, please God, like that's the one I want. That's the 1 seed I want. Cause you know, they're not going to put them in Auburn's thing. I wouldn't assume, like that would break a lot of seeding rules for the SEC thing. I'm not sure I would really want Houston at this point. Like that's a group that can really get after you on the offensive glass. Iowa State, though, is a group that's kind of built similarly to them. Like they're not going to have, like, they're not the biggest, baddest team. They play a lot of 3 small guards. So like that's the type of team that you're trying to look at it if you're Vanderbilt, of a group that we match up with. And, you know, I think Byington's done a good job of like changing his game plans. You know, this isn't a team that has to play one specific way. You know, I thought it was smart that he didn't, you know, run with Kentucky. You know, they ran with Alabama. That was one of the most highest pace tempo teams of the games of the season. That did not go well. They did a really good job, I think, of controlling the tempo against Kentucky and not getting into like a up and down, like, you know, 81 possession game or 78 possession game. Like they really did a good job of that. So I think there is some sort of, you know, like I said earlier, that proof of concept of like, all right, we have a coach who is going to give us the best chance to win because he's not married to one game plan. We're not going to play the same way every time. And he will adjust based on the personnel. But, you know, I do agree with you. Like, I don't think this team is one that I'm like, all right, I'm penciling them into the second weekend and it's all about the matchups. But like this also, they give a lot of teams problems. They really do. They give a lot of teams problems. And if you're looking at them against Iowa State in the round of 32, like if I'm Iowa State, I'm not really thrilled about that potential matchup because they honestly match up pretty well with the small guards all across the board.
That's Isaac Trotter from 247 Sports, covers college basketball at the national level, does a really good job, as you can see, knows ball, knows the SEC pretty well, and it's going to be fun. Going to be interesting to see where this Vanderbilt team goes, Isaac, and I know some fans really appreciated your insight, and I appreciate you taking the time.
Hey, thanks, man. Thanks for having me anytime.
All right, that's Isaac Trotter from right here on 247 Sports. Really good job covering college basketball at a national level. All of a sudden, that Oklahoma matchup Saturday got really interesting with the McLaughlin matchup, and that's going to be huge for Vanderbilt, especially with the week off, you know, to prep for that. So really appreciate Isaac taking his time to come on. I know we got a couple questions in the chat room that we didn't get to, and again, if you guys have comments, questions, feel free to fire away. We will you know, continue to talk about this Oklahoma game throughout this week. We'll just do a lot of basketball. Tomorrow, Will Purdue, and again, I'm not going to sit here and promise it, but I did get a pretty good answer on Will Purdue tomorrow. So looking forward to talking to Will Purdue tomorrow. Wednesday, we'll have the roundtable. Thursday, Joey Dwyer will probably come on. Joey might even come on for a little bit tomorrow too. we'll get that schedule out. But again, no midweek game, so don't have to talk about any game until Saturday. So Vanderbilt at Oklahoma. Justin asks, what's your best offensive versus defensive lineup? And then you say for defense, I go Huffman, Tanner, Mignon, Glock, and Carey. Huffman, Tanner, Mignon. I would almost substitute Hogard for Huffman. I think Hogard's a really good defender. I would put Hogard and Tanner together. And I might even put Collins. Tanner's one of their better defenders. But like you could interchange Collins with Tanner, Collins with Mignon. But yeah, I would just sub Hogard in for Huffman there. Best offensive lineup, probably still put Hogard, nickel, Carey, Edwards. That's 4, and then Collins. Maybe throw Collins in there. But yeah, I mean definitely those 4: nickel, Edwards, Carey, and Hogard. Obviously in there. We had another one down here as well. Is this team better or worse with Kijani Wright from Justin? I mean, you could argue better, obviously. I mean, but hindsight's 2020. They're playing without him. I don't know that we know what this team would have looked like with Kijani Wright. It's hard to say they would have been worse with him. Yeah, I mean, he's a 6'11" guy that's really long and would have affected a lot of shots at the rim that could have really helped this team. So, I think they probably would have been better, but it's hard to tell. Let's see here. I want to make sure we get everything. I think that's it. Yeah, really good guest there, Isaac Trotter. I'm going to try to do a better job of getting more guests on. I'm going to try to reach out to Jeff Goodman as well. They've started talking a lot more about Vandy on Field of 68. So try to get you guys some good guests on here, talk Vanderbilt, and keep it going. But they got Oklahoma on Saturday, and Will Purdue tentatively will be joining tomorrow. But appreciate you guys hopping on. Thanks for listening to another episode of Vandy 247 Live.